If you were born between 1980 and 1992, you're on track to retire with somewhere between $700,000 and $900,000 less in housing wealth than someone born just 10 years before you. Not because you spent more, not because you saved less, not because you made worse decisions, because of one door and the year you arrived at it. This video is not about motivation. It's not about budgeting harder or believing in yourself more. It's about math, specifically the math of what it costs to buy a median American home in 1992 and what it costs to try in 2026. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly where that gap comes from, how it compounds over a lifetime, and what the terrain actually looks like for someone trying to build wealth through housing right now. Two people, same goal, same work ethic, same median income for their decade. One of them is already done. Robert signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. He was 32 years old. The house cost $105,000. His down payment was $21,000, money he had saved over 18 months while working a regular job and paying $550 a month in rent. His mortgage payment was $560 a month. He drove home that evening, sat in the driveway of a house he now owned, and didn't think much of it. It was just the next logical step. That's what you did. You saved, you bought, you moved on. There was no strategy meeting, no spreadsheet with 17 scenarios. The math was simple enough that it almost made the decision for him. Lisa is 38 years old. She's been trying to buy a house for 4 years, not casually browsing, actively trying, saving every month, tracking listings, running numbers on properties she can't yet afford, watching rates move in the wrong direction. Her rent is $1,400 a month, paid faithfully every single month to a landlord who is building equity with her money while she builds none with his. She has $23,000 saved. The median home in her city costs $390,000. The down payment she needs is $78,000. At her current savings rate, she will reach it in 11 more years. She will be 49. Robert didn't get there first because he was smarter. He didn't get there first because he worked harder. He got there first because he showed up in 1992 when the door was open, and Lisa showed up in 2022 when it had already started to close. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. In 1992, the median American home cost $105,000. The median household income was approximately $32,000 a year. That's a price-to-income ratio of 3.3, right inside the healthy range financial advisors have recommended for decades. Robert's mortgage payment represented 17% of his gross monthly income. The traditional lending guideline is 28%. He was 11 points below the danger zone. The math didn't just work, it was forgiving. In 2026, the median American home costs $420,000. The median household income is approximately $80,000 a year. That sounds like progress, until you run the ratio. $420,000 divided by $80,000 is 5.25, 60% higher than what Robert faced. 50% above the upper bound of what any financial advisor would call healthy. And for Lisa, who earned $62,000, closer to the individual median than the household figure, the ratio is 6.7, nearly twice what Robert faced. At that ratio, the mortgage payment on a median home at today's rates would consume 43% of Lisa's gross income, 15 points above the danger zone. No responsible lender would approve it. Lisa knows this, which is why she's still renting. And while she rents, something quiet is happening. Over the 4 years she's been trying to buy, she has paid her landlord approximately $67,000 in rent. That money bought her shelter. It did not buy her equity. It did not buy her appreciation. It did not buy her anything that compounds. It is simply gone. During those same 4 years, the median home in her market appreciated by roughly $85,000. The house she was trying to save for got $85,000 more expensive while she was saving for it. She ran as fast as she could. The finish line moved faster. This is the quiet cruelty of the current housing market, and no amount of budgeting advice addresses it. Because it is not a budgeting problem, it is a velocity problem. The gap between Robert and Lisa isn't a story about discipline or priorities or financial literacy. It's a story about a door, what it cost to walk through it in 1992, what it costs to try in 2026. And in the next part of this video, we're going to build that gap from the ground up, component by component, so you can see exactly where the $900,000 comes from. Because you can't solve the right problem until you've correctly identified what the problem actually is. The gap doesn't come from one place. It comes from three, and each one is larger than most people realize. The first component is equity. Robert bought his home for $105,000 in 1992. Over the following 30 years, American residential real estate appreciated at an average of 3 to 4% per year, conservative by the standards of most major metro areas, but accurate as a national baseline. At 3.5% annual appreciation, Robert's $105,000 home is worth approximately $305,000 today. His mortgage was a 30-year fixed loan. It is paid off. He didn't time the market. He didn't flip properties. He didn't have a strategy. He simply bought a house, made his payments, and let time do what time does when the math is in your favor. Robert's equity, $305,000. Lisa's equity from housing, $0. She has owned nothing. She has paid $1,400 a month, and before that, $1,100, and before that, $850 into a succession of properties that belong to other people. None of it built her a balance sheet. All of it built someone else's. Component 1 of the gap, $305,000. The second component is the cost of waiting, and this one is harder to see because it doesn't show up on any statement. If Lisa had been able to buy in 2020 at 32, the same age Robert bought, she would have paid approximately $290,000 for a comparable home. Mortgage rates that year were near historic lows, around 3% for a 30-year fixed loan. Her monthly payment on a 20% down payment, approximately $980 a month. Instead, she rented from 2020 to 2026 at an average of $1,250 a month. 6 years, 72 months. Total rent paid $90,000. The mortgage she would have paid over those same 6 years, $70,560. The difference in cash outflow, $19,440 more in rent than she would have paid in a mortgage. But that is the smaller number. The home she could have bought in 2020 for $290,000 is now worth approximately $400,000. She didn't buy it, not by choice, but because the timing of her life placed her at the starting line 4 years after the last favorable conditions had passed. Appreciation missed, $110,000. Equity not accumulated through mortgage paydown during those 6 years. Approximately $28,000. Component 2 of the gap, $138,000. The third component is the one that compounds. And this is where most people stop doing the math, because it's uncomfortable. When Lisa finally buys, she will be purchasing a $390,000 home at an interest rate currently sitting near 7%. Robert bought at 8.5%, which sounds worse, until you account for what he was actually buying. His total interest over 30 years on a $105,000 loan at 8.5%, approximately $175,000. Lisa's total interest over 30 years on a $312,000 loan at 7%, approximately $436,000. She will pay 2.5 times more in interest than Robert did. On a smaller house, in a more competitive market, under considerably more financial stress. That additional interest burden, $261,000 more than Robert paid, is almost entirely explained by one variable, not the rate on the loan, the price of the asset. Add the three components together: equity differential, $305,000, cost of waiting, $138,000, additional interest burden, $261,000, total $704,000. That is before accounting for the investment returns Robert generated by not paying $1,400 a month in rent for 6 additional years. Returns that, at 8% annual growth over a 25-year horizon, add roughly another $200,000 in projected wealth. The gap, fully accounted for, lands between $700,000 and $900,000, depending on the market, depending on the city. In some places, it's higher. Now, here's the number that puts all of this in context. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, homeowners in America have a median net worth of $396,000. Renters have a median net worth of $10,400. That is not a typo. $396,000 versus $10,400. A 38-fold difference, driven almost entirely by whether or not someone owns the roof above them. Research from the Urban Institute confirms that Americans who delay homeownership past age 35 accumulate significantly less wealth by retirement, even when controlling for income, education, and savings behavior. Home equity is the single largest component of net worth for the American middle class. It always has been, which means the housing conversation is not a peripheral issue in personal finance. It is the central one, and the window through which the American middle class has historically walked to reach that $396,000 has been functionally closed for the majority of people born after 1980. Not because they didn't try, because the window moved. Lisa knows all of this. That's part of what makes it so difficult. She isn't confused about why she's behind. She has run the numbers, read the articles, tracked the data. She knows the gap exists and roughly how wide it is. What she hasn't been given is a framework for what to do about it. The traditional advice, save more, spend less, be patient, was written for a world where patience was enough, where if you waited long enough, the market would soften, rates would drop, and the door would reopen. That advice assumed the problem was cyclical. What the data increasingly suggests is that it isn't. The relationship between American wages and American home prices has shifted in a way that patient saving on a single income in a high-cost city cannot solve. Not in 11 years. Possibly not ever. Lisa's path forward doesn't look like Robert's, and the first step is stopping that comparison because Robert's blueprint was written for Robert's terrain. The strategies that actually move the math for someone in Lisa's position require a different frame entirely. The first is geographic arbitrage. Robert bought where he worked because remote work wasn't an option. For Lisa, it may be. The same salary that can't support a mortgage in Austin or Denver can support one comfortably in Greenville, Chattanooga, Spokane, or Columbus, cities where the price-to-income ratio still sits closer to 3 than to 6. This is not a retreat. It is a routing decision, a different road to the same destination. The second is income restructuring. The gap between Lisa's monthly rent and a manageable mortgage payment is not primarily a savings problem. It is an income problem. An additional $800 to $1,000 a month in consistent income directed entirely toward a down payment fund closes her gap in 4 years instead of 11. That income doesn't have to mean a second job in the traditional sense. It can mean a skill she already has, deployed differently. The third, and the one that most closely mirrors Robert's actual strategy, adapted for 2026, is house hacking, buying a small multi-unit property, living in one unit, and renting the others. Robert never needed this because the math worked without it. For Lisa, it changes the equation entirely. The rental income offsets the mortgage, the equity still compounds, the wealth still builds, just through a different structure. None of these paths are as clean as Robert's story. Robert bought a house. Lisa has to solve a puzzle, but the outcome, equity, appreciation, a paid-off asset at retirement, can still be the same. Here's what this keeps coming back to. The gap between these two generations in housing wealth is not a story about discipline. It is not a story about avocado toast or priorities or financial literacy. It is a story about timing and terrain. Robert arrived at the right moment. The door was open, the math was forgiving, and the blueprint worked exactly as designed. Lisa arrived 6 years later by the calendar and a generation later by the economics. The house Robert bought at 32 will be paid off before he turns 63. The equity he built, quietly without drama, simply by showing up at the right moment in history, is the foundation of his retirement. Lisa didn't miss that window because she wasn't paying attention. She missed it because it closed before she arrived. And understanding that distinction between a personal failure and a structural one is not just emotionally important. It is strategically important because you cannot solve the right problem until you've correctly identified what the problem actually is. If you're in your 30s and this felt uncomfortably familiar, if you've been doing everything right and the math still doesn't add up, comment, "The door moved" below. I want to know how many of you are navigating this in real time. Episode 4 in this series looks at something Robert had that Lisa was never given, and it has nothing to do with the housing market. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Robert didn't build his wealth because he was exceptional. He built it because the door was open and he walked through. The work now is learning to build a door.